You know, going to Resident Evil 7, I knew that I wasn't going to have this personal connection with the game like a lot of people seem to have with it. It's the return of survival horror, it breathes new life into the series. And while I do agree with those statements to an extent, I'm really not as emotional about it as many people are. I didn't really play Resident Evil until later on in life, so you won't hear generic intro about how when I was a kid I played Resident Evil and I was introduced to survival horror, or you won't hear, "Wow, Resident Evil 5 and 6, am I right guys? Capcom really sucks, but now they learn from their mistakes." I guess what I'm trying to say is that my relationship with Resident Evil is pretty neutral, as I appreciate the series and acknowledge its mistakes, but ultimately have nothing really against it. I'm saying all this because I personally believe that perspective and personal experience can definitely affect how people look at a game, especially a horror game. In this case, I'm more willing to look at Resident Evil's quote-unquote stupidity with tolerance. So yeah, I'm okay with stupid Bugfly Boss.
It's not like Resident Evil was realistic to begin with.
Resident Evil 7 stars Ethan, a man who receives a message from his missing wife, Mia, to come and get her at an old mansion in Louisiana, despite any other messages from her telling him otherwise. Upon arriving, he explores an abandoned house to find Mia locked in the basement, eventually realizing that she is infected. So after many lol XD moments, you eventually get Welcome to the Family Son by Jack Baker, and are introduced to his lovely family. Hijinks ensue. I'll get into the story later, but to start things off, I love Ethan as a character for a Resident Evil game and a horror game, as he's a pretty vulnerable dude with an actual legit reason to be where he is. In previous Resident Evil games, most of the characters could actually handle themselves in the situations they were in. Chris and Jill were STARS members, Leon was a police officer and eventually works for the president. They could handle themselves pretty well. In addition, they also were just kind of there when a situation goes down or their job calls for their presence. Well, with Ethan, he's not like that at all. Ethan actually has an emotional reason for being in the situation he's in, to rescue his wife. So because of that, you can easily see and relate more to why he's willing to do the bizarre things he does in order to save the one he loves. On top of that, Ethan is just a normal dude. He isn't the most physically fit person, nor does he punch boulders. He's just a normal dude trying to survive the situation he's in. With all of this, it makes Ethan a character that I could relate to, and for me to care about his survival and fear for his life. Mia, despite being a minor character throughout most of the story, is a character I also ended up liking a lot. I mean, by Ethan and Mia's dialogue, you can tell that they both really care for each other and love each other. Mia puts Ethan over herself just like Ethan puts Mia over himself, and I find something admirable in that. She does start off as generic horror movie character who can't remember anything, but even in the things she says early on, it shows that she's an affectionate person and quite unique. Again, she wants to save Ethan more than she wants to save herself, which makes you appreciate Mia more even knowing the circumstances she's in and what she's been through. As for the rest of the characters, well, I love the Baker family. Just in the first shot of the family alone, you can tell that they each have their own personalities and even how they function. Jack is the head of the family, as shown by how he's positioned in the middle of the table. He's really strong and masculine, but easily annoyed, as shown when he cuts off his son's arm. And he's also controlling, as shown when he tries to force Ethan to eat their food and tells his wife to shut up. Marguerite is a very eager person, as shown when she's happy to see you wake up. She's very emotional, as shown when Ethan doesn't eat the food. And she's very angry and tends to throw outbursts, as shown when she storms out of the room and slams the door. Lucas is, well, he's annoying and immature, as shown by when he tosses food at you and even throws his plate. He also gets easily annoyed when Jack cuts off his arm and the policeman rings the doorbell, and is also sadistic by the look on his face when Jack is cutting you with a knife. Honestly, the Baker family was one of the reasons I wanted to get Resident Evil 7. I love the idea of enemies with personalities, as it can make character interactions more interesting, and it's a more memorable game because said characters are interesting. If the game relied on traditional zombies like previous Resident Evil games, I still think that Ethan and Mia would still carry some of the game's indelibility, but it's not really a surprise to say that the game is unforgettable because of the thought that was put into the Baker family along with the main characters. It's also more effective in horror because these aren't traditional zombies. Showing their personalities first really intimidates you, as despite the Baker family being infected, they actually can still think and are intelligent. So not only does the Baker family make the game more memorable, but also makes the game more scary because of their personalities and how they function. However, what makes this game even more intriguing goes beyond the Baker family and into the gameplay. Ooh. There seems to be this trend nowadays with a lot of first-person horror games. Most of these horror games being based heavily on making you defenseless and forcing you to stealth. On top of that, they tend to be pretty straightforward by essentially giving you a point A to a point B. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with either of this. I definitely do think that making you defenseless is very tense in a lot of horror games, especially when you present a terrifying enemy. Not only that, but I don't think linearity is as bad as everyone makes it out to be, as there are plenty of games that do it just fine. It's just that these characteristics are very common in a lot of horror games now, to the point where I can feel uninspired. So it's almost like a breath of fresh air to see Resident Evil 7 rely more on exploration and combat like previous RE games, but retain characteristics of modern horror games like stealth and unkillable enemies. Resident Evil 7 is very heavy on exploration, as it's a game that rewards the observant. You can probably spend an hour walking around an area because you weren't paying attention when the puzzle you had to solve was just under a minute. You honestly have to pay attention more to your surroundings if you want to progress. For example, if you find a clock pendulum, it may not always mean that the item you just picked up applies to the room you are in. In that case, you may have to remember if you pass by something that would involve the pendulum, or you may have to explore further. Either way, it's something that really encourages you to explore your surroundings, as you won't get anywhere if you aren't perceptive. Because of that, the game functions a lot like how the original Resident Evil was like, in regards to that you really did have to explore. And if you found an item, you have to remember where it might be used. This exploration-heavy gameplay also makes the game very non-linear as well, once again like the original Resident Evil. Sure, you are always going to an objective, but how you get there really depends on how you interpret your surroundings. For instance, you have to unlock the door here by getting 3 dog heads. Problem with this is that 2 of the dog heads you have to get by solving puzzles, while the other one is in the possession of Jack Baker. Now, here's the thing. If you choose to get the dog head from Jack first, you won't see him for the rest of the time you are in the house. However, you will be significantly less prepared to tackle him. If you get the other 2 dog heads first, not only would you already have the 2 dog heads, but you would also have a lot more ammo to face off against the enemies when you reach the basement. The only downside is that Jack is still roaming around trying to hunt you down as you get the other 2 dog heads. It's kind of like a double-edged sword in both cases. Furthermore, in the old house, I found myself taking multiple and different ways to get to where I need to go. I would scan around my surroundings first and try to see which is the safest. If I choose certain directions, while I might get there quicker, there's a chance I could get attacked by these little fly things. So Resident Evil 7 ends up being a very dynamic game because of this kind of exploration-based gameplay. But as I said earlier, they also combine elements of ye olden survival horror gameplay and the cool, hip, modern horror games. That being definitely seen in the combat. Originally, I was going to say that Resident Evil 7 is both a combination of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 1 because of the open-endedness of the gameplay, but Resident Evil 4 because the combat relies more on shooting accurately and quickly to dispatch enemies as efficiently as possible. However, after talking to some friends and seeing how they played, that's when I came to determine that the game's combat both reflects Resident Evil 4 and modern horror games. You see, when I played the game, I played it like how I would play a Resident Evil game. So I found myself trading with caution, trying to take enemies out efficiently to conserve ammo, and run away whenever I'm in trouble. Not only that, but when I faced a molded, I had to make an accurate headshot in order for the best results. I found myself trying to make sure I lined headshots up perfectly to not only conserve the ammo I had, but to take out the molded or stun the bakers. It's pretty similar to Resident Evil 4 in that regard. However, my friends on the other hand played the game stealthily. Not only did they feel like they avoided enemies a lot of the time, but they also said they conserved a lot of ammo when they really needed it in desperate situations. It's interesting to think about, as I didn't really consider stealth as an option. I mean, sure, I did use stealth in really dire situations where I accidentally left some first aid in a safe room and I'm all red stuck in a basement with molded nearby, but I mostly thought that was because of dumb luck or... yeah, just that probably. Regardless though, it was really cool to see that yeah, if you do have good game sense and pay attention, that you can indeed stealth. It's interesting because as opposed to using this as a trend seen in a bunch of modern horror games, they use it to promote another way of running away and conserving ammo. Because if an enemy finds you and you hide somewhere, you may not have to backtrack as far and you can easily make your way to your destination. Furthermore, because you're not using any ammo and mostly rely on your surroundings to hide, which also ties into the whole exploration thing as well, then you won't have to worry about trying to find ammo when you desperately need it. In fact, it's actually really helpful, especially if you're trying to get away from any of the bakers, as opposed to what I did and just shoot them in the head and trying to stun them. Once again, it just makes the game more dynamic. Speaking of the bakers, they also affect a large part of the gameplay. For one thing, they are unkillable, which is why you either have to stun them or hide, but they mostly influence large parts of the game because of their AI. Jack Baker is more of a stalker, so he'll just kind of be waiting for you or you'll run into him looking for you. Marguerite Baker patrols the set area of the old house and attacks you with these bug enemies, and Lucas Baker sets up traps that you will have to avoid and look out for. Each of the bakers you have to adjust to depending on their function. For Jack, I tend to just walk around normally. If I hurt him, I try to detour, or if I see him, I run away and/or I stun him. For Marguerite, I mostly just watched her patrol until I was at a point where I can get by her, and if she saw me, well, I stunned her. For Lucas, I just tread with caution so I can be exactly aware where he puts his traps at. You have to be observant with their behavior if you want to think about getting away from them. Like, oh, Jack might be behind that door, I should probably take a detour. Or, Lucas might place a bomb right here, look out. It was honestly pretty cool to see myself adapt to the circumstances I was in. On top of that, the boss battles with said bakers are really stellar. To give you context, you are literally fighting an immortal zombie with a chainsaw. And even when you thought it was over and the game couldn't get any more crazy, the game just slaps you in the face and gives you this.
Get your ass back to the house.
But there is more to the boss battles than just crazy set pieces, which are good, I'll have you know. The boss battles are very different depending on your current inventory and just simply how much ammo you have. Let me elaborate. When I was fighting against Marguerite in her spider monkey form, I ended up running out of ammo. So I ended up panicking, running around trying to find ammo, all while she's trying to hunt me down. With Jack Baker 3.0, I grenaded the shit out of him, everything was on fire, I was blowing stuff up, I was just feeling like a badass. And that's what's great about the boss battles. Their difficulty just ranges depending on how well you manage your inventory, how you conserve your ammo, and just simply finding items in general. It makes everything feel more rewarding because of it. Even if you're like me in the Marguerite boss fight, just surviving and scavenging enough ammo to finally defeat her was so fulfilling. And even in the Jack Baker 3.0 fight, I found myself feeling so gratified by the fact that I had so much ammo that the boss battle was easy, but worthwhile. Either way, you come out of the battle feeling like you just beat a boss in Dark Souls. It's that satisfying. They were probably the most memorable parts of the game, simply because my attention was entirely focused whenever a fight is going down. It's really good. Anyways, I wanted to talk about the story last, simply because it's probably the best Resident Evil story ever. It feels like a suspenseful mystery, just trying to figure out what happened to the bakers, why Mia's there, who the hell this ghost girl is, just a bunch of stuff you're wondering about. The thing I love about it though is that it gives you the chance to properly theorize while not giving you too much. You just question if previous Resident Evil characters were involved. For me especially, I was just wondering if Wesker or Umbrella, or just anyone, had some involvement in what was going on, and I love that. The ending of the game, which I won't spoil, gives you even more questions, but still makes things a lot more clearer. To give you context, I was talking and theorizing with friends immediately after I beat the game about what exactly is happening, who's who, what it means for the story, and just a bunch of stuff that I was hooked in. And to me, that's what makes a good story. Just giving you enough to understand what's going on, but leave some stuff out to have you keep guessing why or who is involved. A lot of people may not read into it, or hell, may not even play Resident Evil for the story, so they just don't care. But seeing as how there seems to be a pretty active fan base who are wondering and questioning the same things, it's just something that's pretty cool to be a part of. Holy shit, that was too meta. But yeah, there's not really a whole lot to complain about here. Really, the only conflicting thing with the game for me is the fact that it starts to slowly become less scary as it goes on. And well, you can either see it as a good or bad thing. Bad in the sense that, well, duh, it's a horror game, you're supposed to be scared, hence why it's called a horror game. But it can easily be seen as good because it allows you to conquer your fear of the bakers and the molded. As the game kept progressing, I found myself more confident in facing the bakers and the molded. I've been building an inventory and building myself up to take on these guys. So it's not really surprising when I become less scared of the molded because I'm saying to myself, yeah, I can take them. But it's also what a lot of Resident Evil games do in general. Just building your character up to tackle and fight the things you were so afraid to encounter earlier. So, really, I don't know if it's necessarily bad that it becomes less scary. It's not like it was any less tense or anything, it's just that I was more willing to conquer my fear. Whatever, dude. I really do love this game. Just the gameplay, the combat, and particularly the story, had me in this web that I can't really get out of. It was a game that I immediately want to play right after I beat it, and I can only say that with a few games. Hell, I can't really even say that for the games that are my all-time favorites. Either way, it's one hell of a game. It brings the familiarity that a lot of people wanted back in the Resident Evil series, and as much as I'm not a lifelong fan of the game, like a lot of other people are, it sure gets me really excited to see where they might go with the story and even the series for that matter. Here's hoping they don't screw it up.